Time for sound design. In today's video, I'm going to explore the new drum sampler device in Ableton 12.1. As you might have seen in the new version of Ableton, there are two new devices. One is an effect, the auto shift, which is basically like a auto tune. And the other big thing is the drum sampler. I'm going to explore this device, try it with some different kind of samples, play around with the internal effects and see if we can create something with this new device. So here in Ableton, if you go to drums, there is typically only the drum rack, but now there is this drum sampler. And the device looks like this. This is the empty window where you would drop a sample, and then there's a bunch of controls for the start, length and gain, attack, hold, decay, transpose, detune. And then this is the cool part of the drum sampler, which is the built-in effects. So you can see, if you look at the list, it's a bunch of different effects, some of them a bit more common than others. And each effect has two parameters, and you can have one, or you can choose one of these effects at the same time. And then there's a filter, different types of filter, and then some other general settings like velocity and bending and volume. So it looks a bit, it looks quite like straightforward, but if you play around with the effects and add some modulation, for instance an LFO, which is not included in this device, but you can just use the regular LFO or use some automation, you can create some quite interesting sounds. So that's what I'm going to do today. So without further ado, let's start with the first sample. I'm going to the library of sounds in Ableton, drum sounds, so one shots, percussion. And let's start with something like a Conga. A fairly basic sound. Let's drop it in. And now I can play this over the keyboard. So C3 is the original pitch. And as you can hear, you can play this sound over the entire keyboard. So you can go 3-4 octaves down and up, and you play it. So this is similar as you would use simpler or sampler, so there's nothing special about this part. So let's first create a pattern before we dive into the effects. So I'm just gonna create a very simple, let's do a 1-bar loop. Let's keep it very simple with some repeating notes here in the end. Let's see how this sounds. Very basic. So I want to first explore the stretch effect, and there's a factor and there's a grain. So let's play around with this. So the factor is like how much you stretch it, and 1 is basically no stretching, and the grain is kind of the length of it. So if you make this shorter, it becomes very... So I'm thinking to automate the tweaking of these parameters. So I'm going to drop in an LFO. I'm going to map it to the factor. And already now you can hear that there's this kind of texture emerging from this one sample. I put the LFO on random, create a kind of loop that is not too repetitive. And I think if we also put an LFO on the grain, we really get something that is changing all the time. And that could be a cool loop. So let's try that. Second LFO. And maybe we keep that on a sinus. So then we map this to the grain. And maybe we don't want to go all the way to a very short grain size, so we do 30 to 100%. And maybe we kind of change the MIDI clip, the notes to C2, so there's a lower note. Okay, that's a bit too low. Put it on the G. And since neither of the two LFOs are actually synced to the tempo, they don't actually line up exactly. So every time you play the loop, it will be a little bit different. And the cool thing is now we can transpose the entire loop by transposing the sample. So let's do it 1 octave up. Or 1 octave down. maybe one octave up sounds better. You get these really high, like percussive sounds, very sort of detailed sounds. It's perfect for using as a sort of ear candy loop in your production. And you can see that already with one sample, one simple conga sample that sounds like this. You now, with the drum sampler and 2 LFOs, you created this kind of textural loop. So what I would do is just record a whole bunch, a whole long loop of this, like 16 bars, 32 bars, and then record it as an audio loop and add it to my library of sounds. Or additionally to that, I could also just save this in an instrument rack. So I have this kind of drum sampler with these settings and these LFOs that I can pull up as a way to create a textural loop. Let's go to a second example where I use a kick drum and another effect in the drum sampler. A new MIDI track. Let's go to the kick category and find something like a nice analog kick. And maybe we can use the noise effect. And I'm thinking if we change the settings very dramatically from no effect to the entire effect, so we can do that by just turning the effect on and off. So this sounds like a regular kick drum, but with the effect, it sounds like a kick drum with a snare layered on top. So if we just put in a pattern, and then we can also use the pitch, change the pitch. So the snare drum, the second one, that's sort of the one with the noise overlaid, is an octave higher. So it would sound like this. And if we now automate the effect on off, then we can create the illusion of there's a snare drum, or it's not really an illusion because there is a noise burst on top of that kick drum. So let's do right click, show automation in new lane, and then draw in the automation for 1 bar and copy it. And now it sounds like this. So basically with one sample, one kick drum, using a different pitch and using the noise effects, you can have the idea that there is a snare drum layered on top of the kick drums. But it's kind of cool that you can do it in one device now in Ableton. Let's go to another example. So for this example, let's go again to the percussion category and find something. What is Tabla? Could be nice. Okay, let's put in a pattern with this percussion instrument. Let's start with 1 bar again, and let's do something quite simple. Let's go up another octave to C5. And let's choose an effect. I'm thinking this time the loop effect. And as you can see, there's an offset, so that's where in the sample you want to loop. You see this kind of green rectangle, and then it's the length of the loop. So if you do it super short and the offset is all the way in the beginning of the sample, that every time you trigger the sample, you hear that it's being looped. If you do it a bit further into the sample, then it's more the tail of the sample gets looped. Let's see if we make these notes also longer. That has an effect. So again, I want to add an LFO, or maybe 2 LFOs actually. Modulate the offset and also modulate the length of the looping. And for the first one, for the offset, maybe we don't want to go all the way. So maybe to 70% and we start at 10%. And this can be quite slow. And then the length we want to randomize. Do it maybe from 0 to 15. And the cool thing is, again, we can transpose the entire loop by transposing the sample. So let's go +12. First, this is the original pitch. And again, you can see with one simple sample that actually just sounds like this. We can create this very textural loop that keeps on changing with just the fact that there are two LFOs that modulate the two parameters in a different way, like not in a synced way. Let's play a little bit with the parameters. What if we crank it all the way up to 5, and then we slow this down. So as you can see, it's a lot of fun. You can really play around with this and create textures. From all the effects that are available in the drum sampler, I think the stretch and loop effects are particularly nice, but it also a little bit depends on your sample. Like you can also throw in a vocal sample or like some kind of noise sample. And if you throw in a synthesizer node, maybe the sub oscillator is something that works well. So it's really depending on the sound and the kind of thing you want to establish, but I highly recommend playing around with the stretch and the loop effect for sure. And then of course there's the filter. You can also modulate that. There are 4 different types of filters, so that's also fun. Let me know what you think about the drum sampler in Ableton. Have you tried it? With what kind of samples did you try it? And how did you use it? What kind of results did you get? Did you also get these kind of textural loops, or are you using it more for actual kind of percussive loops? Let me know down in the comments. As always, keep making music. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.